Welcome to the February 4th Town Council meeting. May I have a roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syak.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. Now is time in our program where we invite a accomplished young person from our community up to share or lead us in the pledge. Arshia Mather, come on up. Arshia is in the 10th grade at Los Gatos High School. She serves on our Los Gatos Youth Commission, where she is the liaison to the Community and Senior Services Committee. She is also a founder of Los Gatos High School UNICEF Club that encourages outreach among students to affect the world globally. She is also the chair of the Social Justice Committee, encouraging diversity and working for programs throughout the community for social justice and diversity. She's also, you can probably tell, a dancer. She's been dancing for 10 years and a very accomplished young lady. So Arshia, will you lead the pledge for us?
Please stand. Please place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Great job. How about a round of applause for Arshia? We are next going to have a presentation which is quite apropos. As most of you are aware, the Democrats had Iowa caucuses yesterday and ongoing today, I guess. And California has moved its primary up to March 3rd. And so we have asked, or the League of Women Voters has asked, and we've allowed, to make a presentation to all of us on election issues. So Mr. P. Crow. And is your mic working, or pull it up?
Great, thank you. So this is a study which you have a copy that the League of Women Voters did. It's after the 2018 election. It's a follow-up to one we did after the 2016 election. And as I think you know, we're, how do I make this go forward? The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit organization, nonpartisan. It doesn't support or oppose political candidates or political parties, but we do advocate for issues after we've studied them. And in this case, the finance study is one that we've looked at the last election, the voting, the spending on the election, what are the regulations and rules that were followed in that case locally, and I'll talk just about the city council races in our area primarily, which is Montserino, Los Gatos, Saratoga, and Campbell. And then I'll make comparison to the other 11 cities in Santa Clara County. We compare
Mr.
practices.
Also, if you'd like to just take the mic out so you can, when you turn, you still have the mic.
Sounds good. This is what I'm used to. And we present findings and suggest some things we think might be best practices to discuss by the council. The real purpose of this is to promote participation and transparency in local elections for both voters and for candidates. That's our objective, and whatever people think turns out to work best that way is what we are in favor of. Now, there are really two things I want to talk about here. It won't take long. The first is best practices. I want to note that Los Gatos, since the 2016 election, has enhanced their election and voter information webpage with lots of good information, including a very detailed candidate guide for potential new candidates, one of 8 cities in Santa Clara County who have that on the web. And also, we're very happy that they're posting candidate election contributions and expenditure reports on the web now. You've done that. You've hired a service that makes it possible to electronically file as well as your expenditure reports on the web. So after a reporting period, like after the 3rd week in October, we can look and see what you've spent, who's contributing to your campaign, how much money you're raising. Now, in many cases, that may not matter, but in case there have been cases in elections where there have been very large amounts of money are being spent, and you may wonder, where is that coming from, inside or outside? And, of course, you can see who gave the money, where they live, what's their employer, or their business that's giving this money, and when. And so we think that's a good practice. Also, we commend the town council. A few months ago, you talked about term limits given some things happening in town, and we think it's good to have that discussion. We don't take a position on that one way or the other. Now, the second thing are some findings that we would like to have you consider. And one is, I'm sorry to put that first, Councilor Spector, but one does involve a little bit of spending of money, and that is the practice that some cities have used of providing a partial cost of the candidate statement that goes into the voter information pamphlet that goes to all people. And there's a charge for that, typically around $1,500 for the cities in our area to help defer the cost of that payment. But that's something that comes up as you first file and start to run, and we feel it can be a bit of a discouragement or barrier, which could be lowered by some reduction in cost to new candidates. In Campbell's case, for example, they charge a candidate $300, and then they pay the balance. In other places, they split the cost and various other approaches, but Campbell is the only one in our area that follows that practice. The second point here is to consider the merits of contribution limits and voluntary campaign spending limits. Contribution limits, for example, 4 cities in Santa Clara County have limits ranging from $250 per individual contributor to $600, that's $250 in Milpitas and $600 in San Jose. And of course, that doesn't apply to candidates or their family members. Voluntary campaign spending limits is another area where 6 cities in Santa Clara County have these limits. They're voluntary by federal law now. They range from like $14,000 for Palo Alto to up to $40,500 in Santa Clara right now. I'd like to call your attention to Mountain View. And the reason I mentioned this particularly is because as we looked at the analysis, all campaign spending went up in our 4 cities, and we see in other areas it's been going up, in some cases rather rapidly. It only went up 6% in Campbell, but 13% in Los Gatos, and in the 80% range in both Montserino and Saratoga. Some campaigns running at 40,000 or so in Saratoga this last election. Seems like a lot. Santa Clara, for example, pays half the fee of the candidate statement if you voluntarily follow the voluntary campaign spending limits. Mountain View pays a part, and they've held their costs down to about $25,000 per candidate rather effectively.
So, Mr.
Thank you.
Picro, that red light was your cue that your time is up. Have you finished
Understand.
your presentation?
I have.
Why don't you let us know, the council has a packet from you. Where can members of the public who are interested get a copy of this?
Yes, it's on our website, which is listed at the bottom here. But if you look on the web for League of Women Voters, Santa Clara, Southwest Santa Clara Valley, and then you go into our website, it's a big poster, new, this study. So it's available on the web to everyone.
Thank you very much. Are
Thank
there any
you.
questions for Mr. Picro? Thank you very much for taking the time to present that information. We appreciate it. Which brings us to our closed session report. Mr. Schultz?
Yes, good evening. Prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session to discuss labor negotiations, and no action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Now, this portion of our agenda, council matters and manager matters. This is an opportunity for council members who serve on other committees and boards outside of this august body for Los Gatos to report on action items or policy matters of interest to the community at large. Does anyone have a report? Ms. Sayak.
A report and then just an update with regards to housing. The League of Cities had a housing forum that Director Paulson and I attended on January 29th. Some items that were discussed was the status of SB 50, which did not pass, and the RENA allocation, which we are all members of. I do know that ABAG, Mayor Jensen, will be attending on our behalf, and they'll be discussing RENA allocation and just the continuous item of housing, but I do ask all those interested to please pay attention, because what we are being told, even though we do not have housing numbers, is that we should anticipate for housing numbers of approximately close to 2,000, given that our last allocation was 619. So I'd like to just make sure our community is well aware that these are policy changes that are happening, and we need your continued involvement as we have these discussions.
Thank you. Mr. Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. A little bit of report on VTA. I'm chair for the Congestion Management Standing Committee. We met on the 23rd. Some items were East Ridge Light Rail project changes. Again, they needed changes to the EIR for some changes they wanted to add a little bit to the cost. We received some reports on our VRF projects and funding, and the TFCA projects and funding, that's Transmit Fund for Clean Air. We also had a workshop for VTA board on the 24th. Subject of the workshop was a report from a consultant about board governance, which was a response to the grand jury report that we Los Gatos sent in a response on. The result of the discussion was we sent several of their suggested changes to our governance and audit committee for further discussion, and since I'm on the governance and audit committee, I will be involved in those discussions. Also, Councilmember Sack and I met with the finance committee yesterday, and we are forwarding two recommendations to the pension oversight board, which include dollar cost averaging for CalPERS additional payments and a recommendation on the PERS 115 Trust Investment Fund.
Thank you very much. Ms. Spector?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Several meetings since the last council meeting. The Santa Clara Valley Water District Commission met, and generally what they did is they looked what happened in 2019 and what can we anticipate in 2020. What I thought was interesting was that because there was more rain than anticipated last year, the consumers used less water, and because of that, there was a revenue shortfall for the district, which they are now giving thought to how they're going to handle it. The policy committee met, And we did a lot of items, but the one that had the most work, I think, was the below market price ordinance, where we gave a lot of input, and it'll be coming to the council. And then GPAC, the General Plan Advisory Committee, will be forwarding to the Planning Commission in February, we anticipate, and to the council in March, our initial conceptualization of how and where in Los Gatos we will propose to meet our anticipated RENA mandates.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just follow up on that and on Councilwoman Sayak's request that people pay attention. We do expect that our regional housing needs allocation numbers will be quite high, although we are working to negotiate with ABAG and have input on the metrics that they use to determine those numbers. But in keeping with that, the General Plan Advisory Committee that Ms. Spector was just speaking about did consider alternatives for different land uses in the town of Los Gatos, which include, in some cases, in some zones, higher density to try to meet the anticipated numbers. And I'll just say, based on contacts I have in Southern California, they had an incredible increase in the housing numbers. Something on the, Mr. Pavetti will know, but something on the order of 300%. So people should be aware that this is something that all communities in the Bay Area are going to have to be dealing with, as well as our community. And with that, Ms. Pavetti.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to announce that we have a very special event coming up this Saturday at our library at 2 p.m. We have a critically acclaimed author named Julian Guthrie, who's the author of Alpha Girls, who will be talking about her book and about women empowerment in the tech industry here in Silicon Valley. Her book has been so well received that they will be making a television series out of it. So 2 p.m. on Saturday at our library. It should be a wonderful program. And then we're getting ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day in our Spring into Green celebration, which this year will be on April 19th, Sunday, April 19th at Town Plaza Park, beginning at 10. We'll have activities for children, rock climbing walls, and the usual fun things. So please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavetti. We'll now move on to consent items. We have 8 items that are on. Generally, a consent calendar is something that has been evaluated for items that are non-controversial or that are coming back for example, in the case of an ordinance, a second reading, and could be, the determination is that they could be passed in a single motion. I received earlier today, the council received earlier today, a letter from Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. And Brian Malone, are you here? And is it your intent to pull item number 4, our wildfire safety ordinance, from the consent calendar so that Mid-Peninsula can register an objection to economic obligations on the part of the agency? Okay, we will hear it in its normal order then. Does anyone in the audience or council wish to pull any other item from consent? Okay, seeing no one, is there a motion?
I
Ms.
move we approve 1 through 7 of consent with the exception of item 4.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. So before we move on to our normal calendar, this is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the council during what we call verbal communications about an item that is not on tonight's agenda. I now have 2 cards. The first card is from Ms. Eleanor Yick.
Thank you. Good evening, Town Council members. My name is Eleanor Yick, a community member and a member of the local League of Women Voters. I'm here tonight to talk to you about 2 important events that are about to take place in our community. The first regards the implementation of the Voters' Choice Act, starting with the March 3rd primary. As you probably know, the VCA dramatically changes how we will vote starting in March and probably forevermore. What's involved? Every registered voter in Santa Clara County will receive a mail-in ballot and can make the decision how to vote, when to vote, and where to vote. They can choose to fill in their ballot, return it by mail. They can choose to fill it in and drop it off at a secure mailbox, a ballot box, or they can visit a vote center. This is probably the most dramatic change. There are no more local polling places. They've been replaced by vote centers, which tend to be much bigger facilities. You can go to a vote center if you need additional assistance. For example, the ballot will be available in 13 different languages. You can get a replacement ballot if you've lost yours. If you have any kind of condition that impacts the way that you vote, you can receive assistance at these vote centers. Some of them will be open for 11 days, including Election Day, for the one at West Valley College, and others will be open for 4 days, including Election Day. For example, the one that's going to be at Los Gatos Lodge. A complete listing is on the ROV website. The League of Women Voters is working with many partners, including the Registrar of Voters, to get the word out about these changes. We'd like to ask your assistance, too, by posting this information on your website and other social media that the town utilizes. The second item I wish to highlight tonight is the upcoming Census 2020. Again, the League of Women Voters is intensely involved in this effort and working with many partners throughout the county to ensure a complete count. All residents are encouraged to participate because it impacts how much federal money our state receives, our representation in the House of Representatives, and redistricting. Santa Clara County is one of the 10 highest counties with an undercounted population. People can participate in the census for the first time online or by phone, where it's available in 13 languages, by paper form, or in person. Again, thank you for listening to me, and we hope to have your assistance in our efforts to popularize this. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge Marico and Laurel Prevetti. I sent an email to all of our town councils and school boards about this item and asking what your plans were. Los Gatos was the only one that responded. Thank you.
Ms. Yick, if people want more information, can you give a contact number and or website?
Yes, I can certainly give our league website, which has all of this information, and I can also provide my own because I'm Director of Voter Services this year. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Summers.
Good evening, Council. Catherine Summers with the Chamber of Commerce. And I just wanted to bring to your attention, I think most of you know, but we have a big celebration this week on Thursday night where we are honoring our hometown heroes. And for those of you that may not have been keeping up with who the hometown heroes are this year, we have a few awards. We have the Business of the Year Award going to Keller Williams for their dedicated service for the last, Mark Von Cano has been running that since, I think, 2000. Even before that, has been such a great contributor to the town in all ways. So we are honoring him as well as his entire team at Keller Williams. We are honoring Loma Brewing Company as the Innovators of the Year for all that they have done with bringing us a new brewery, a coffee house, trivia nights, sports nights. I mean, the list goes on. They've been really instrumental in helping us with our block parties. So we're very thankful to them. We also have the Rising Stars Award, which is going to Brian Berlusconi and Dan Rubnitz of Sereno Group, who, as many of you know, have been doing these great videos, really have been great ambassadors for the town. Brian will be helping me with the emceeing on Thursday night. Then we have our Champion or Citizen of the Year Award is going to Stephanie Nelson. Mariko is going to help with that presentation, and Stephanie really embodies kind of what the Chamber stands for in being a catalyst, a convener, and a champion for all in this community. So we're really excited to honor her. And then lastly, we are giving an honorary award to the defender of our realm, who's Matt Morley. I'm sure he's working on his remarks over there. And so we have some fun. It's going to be a great, fun night. I know many of you are coming, but I wanted to just make that announcement that we're it's probably one of my favorite times of year when we really get to look around and honor some of the really special people and recognize the gifts that they bring to our town. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. As we go into the public hearings, I want to let people know who are interested in items 8, grant funding, or item 9, streamlining ordinances. I'm actually going to reverse the order of those because Councilwoman Sayak needs to recuse herself on the grant funding item, so that is going to be called last, and the ordinance consideration is going to be called previous. We're just simply reversing the order on that. For those of you, I think most of you I see in the audience have participated in these meetings. We'll get a staff presentation. The council will have an opportunity to ask questions. We'll then open it up for comments from the public. Once everyone has said what they want to in the 3 minutes available to them, we will close the public hearing. The council then can ask more questions, have a discussion, make a motion, and we would ask you all to give kind respect to those who are speaking while they are up at the podium, and those of you that do speak, please don't run away when you're done because the council may have questions for you. That said, Mr. Andrews, item number 4, our wildfire safety ordinance.
Thank you, Mayor and Town Council. The item before you was heard on January 21st at a first reading, and it relates to staff's recommendation for elements of Chapter 9, which is fire prevention and protection. As we're all well aware, Los Gatos is a beautiful community. We relish our hillsides, but our hillsides also make us one of the highest fire-prone communities in the state, with a fire rating even higher than Paradise. Based on that, staff has been putting together comprehensive elements of different ordinances, and within Chapter 9, first and foremost, we made a recommendation to make it perfectly clear to our community that it is state law that you have to have 100 feet of defensible space if you live in what's referred to as the wildland-urban interface. In addition, staff took advantage of state law that allows communities, if they see fit, to require additional defensible space across property lines. During staff's peer review, we copied what is already very predominantly done in the state. It's done in the county of Napa, the county of Placer, it's done in the county of San Diego, where they've crafted language that makes it possible in certain circumstances to require property owners to help provide defensible space beyond the property line. The language that staff recommended actually was watered down a little from the peer language that we saw throughout the state, because we want to make it perfectly clear that our intent is for this to be a item in an ordinance that is used on minimal occasions, only when neighbor to neighbor can't come to a reasonable conclusion, and only in the event that our fire official deems that the situation being discussed actually prevents a clear danger will we actually use this ordinance. So it was the intent of staff that in extenuating circumstances, in a limited case, that we have the ability, if property owners cannot come to a reasonable conclusion themselves, that we will help bring a reasonable conclusion. I will point out, too, that Mid-Penn, who will be speaking in a minute, already has, as it states in their letter, a very functioning neighbor program. It was not our intent at all to do anything to diminish their ability to utilize that program, but it is the intent of staff through the ordinance and the recommended language that came before you on the 21st to do everything we can to give our residents the ability to safeguard themselves in what is one of the highest fire communities in the state.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Andrews or other members of the staff? Mr. Rennie.
So the Mid-Penn does bring up a new question, which we didn't seem to consider. We were thinking neighbors, private property, private property. They're now talking about, and they are suggesting some language that's, you know, government entities are exempt from this kind of thing. And as you said, they, I guess at this point I'll just ask the question, in your looking through the state, has there been any other concerns about government or items that have been included in ordinances that deal with the neighbor maybe as a government agency?
And I didn't find any peer language that does carve out government entities. And I will point out, the town is a landowner, and in all our staff reports, we make it clear that we too have to be a responsible landowner. And so Chief Bowden of Santa Clara County Fire says often, fire doesn't care about boundaries. And so I think all of us have to realize that we need to be better land stewards where we have properties we need to manage. And so I was never able to find a carve-out for government entities, and that would include ourselves.
Second question. So they feel like they can no longer implement their program with our language. Is that, do you feel like that's really the case?
I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not intimately familiar with their program, but on the surface, it sounds like, and if you look at the state law says that you have to have landowner agreement to enter the property. So it looks like they've set up a permitting vehicle where they basically grant access to the property, and in return, they're allowing the adjoining property owner to come on and do the vegetation management. So it looks as if there is already some type of an exchange there. They're allowing access to their property in return for the property owner to go on. So I don't see how this would do anything to preclude that from continuing.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I actually have a question. I think it's for Mr. Schultz. Because this is on second reading tonight, if the council determines that it wants to make any changes to the unanimously approved ordinance from our last meeting, what's the effect of that? Do we start all over again at ground zero with a brand new ordinance, brand new public hearing, and another second reading?
Certainly, it would depend on what your amendments were. If it was either one that Mid-Penn has proposed, yes, you'd have to go back to first reading because they are substantial enough changes that someone who thought this would go through the second reading might have an objection now to their new language of either excluding public agencies or doing the cost on the property owner.
Okay, thank you. So right now I have one card from Mr. Brian Malone of Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. If there's anyone in the audience who would also like to talk about this, please fill out a card. You'll find them in the back of the benches and hand it to Mr. Andrews. Mr. Malone, you have 3 minutes.
Mayor, Council, thank you for the time tonight. My name is Brian Malone. I'm the Assistant General Manager with the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. And we respectfully urge a change to the proposed ordinance, just to the Los Gatos Ordinance Code Section 4907, Defensible Space. Mid-Penn acknowledges the need for all jurisdictions, including the town of Los Gatos, to review and update ordinances and practices to reduce the risk of wildfires and improve public safety. Mid-Penn has been engaging the larger community, neighbors, fire safe councils, the town of Los Gatos, Santa Clara County Fire, and CAL FIRE to develop a robust wildland fire resiliency program. This program will identify and prioritize regional fuel reduction projects in high fire danger zones for the enhanced public safety and ecosystem resilience to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfires in the region. Mid-Penn administers a permit system, which we talked about. Any neighbor can come to us and request a permit, which will be issued free, no charge, for the neighbor to come onto district property and perform fire clearance so that they're able to get the 100 feet of clearance. As mentioned, I don't think that your proposed ordinance would interfere with that, but a neighbor could read the ordinance and justly think, instead of them getting a permit and performing it, they could then tell the district, with the fire marshal's concurrence, that it was the district's responsibility to do the clearance. And any responsible fire marshal would probably say that 100 feet of clearance, which we all acknowledge is very important for the home, should be conducted. Our only objection is to shift the responsibility to the neighboring property owner. Such a policy would place the burden on protecting the private property on adjoining neighbors, and in Mid-Penn's case, as was mentioned, would place the burden on the public to pay for protecting that particular property. As I mentioned, we do a lot of work every year in regional work cooperating with other fire agencies to protect the community at large. With our concerns in mind, I offer 2 suggestions to revise the language. One is a carve-out, and we just suggested this for the simplest result, that the adjacent parcels owned by government entities will not be subject to this section. Or the other one was just to make it clear that the ordinance was to allow entry onto the property, but still have the responsibility be the homeowner's responsibility for the clearance. If the council does not wish an amendment of the proposed ordinance at this time, we ask that the final adoption be delayed while we have time to consult with town staff to develop appropriate language that would address our concerns and still allow Los Gatos homeowners to create defensible space. Thank you for your consideration.
Are there questions for Mr. Malone? Okay.
Mr. Malone, do you have a sense of how many of your properties is adjacent to private properties? Could you give me a sense of how many this is going to affect?
So we ran the GIS kind of just to look at structures within 100 feet, and there appears to just be 8 structures within 100 feet, and there's probably 3 times as many parcels. This is just for, there are additional parcels and structures adjacent to Mid-Penn property in unincorporated county lands, but of course, your ordinance would not apply to those lands.
Okay, I have a couple questions. I'm sorry, Ms. Spector, I didn't see you before I started talking, but I'll get to you. Mr. Malone, thank you for your letter and presentation. You began, I think, both in your letter and tonight by indicating that Mid-Penn has a robust management program for fire safety. There's nothing in that program that's inconsistent with the Los Gatos ordinance, is there? You can certainly continue that program with the Los Gatos ordinance basic parameters, not the money, the basic parameters of the management, vegetation management.
So yeah, and the program focuses on regional safety and cooperation with other agencies, not on the essential individual homeowners protection of their clearance around their house.
So which goes to my second question, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I keep coming back to the question in my mind that Mid-Peninsula is another landowner in our hillside that's obligated to create defensible space, just like my neighbor who has a nice house might be my neighbor, and I work out, as Mr. Andrews indicated, an agreement if there's some identified problem. I think that you're asking just basically as a monetary consideration to be exempted from this ordinance because you don't want to, I could say it nicely and say have the financial responsibility, or I could say it not so nicely and say you don't want to pay to clean up vegetation that you need to clean up. Tell me where I'm wrong if I'm wrong.
So Mid-Penn, like any other homeowner, we have structures on our property and we perform that fire clearance around those structures. And then what we're saying is that the individual homeowner on an adjacent private property should be responsible, as they are required by state law, to do the clearance. Quite often, the open space district does not even have access for a vehicle or such to that section of our property. It would only be accessible through the private property. So we would like to concentrate our taxpayer resources on the regional protection of the community through important fuel reduction work rather than those individual homes that are responsibility of the homeowner.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Spector?
Thank you. 2 questions. First one is a process one. I was actually surprised to get your letter because I would have assumed that Mid-Penn would have come in when we were going over this initially. Did Mid-Peninsula get notice of our ordinance development?
We were not noticed. We just discovered the day of the first reading. I contacted staff, Assistant Town Manager Andrews, and he spent some time with me, explained it. I did not have time to prepare a response. He assured me that there would be an opportunity for a second reading. I apologize that I'm coming to you at this late date. We would have surely liked to have come during the first reading.
And as a council person, I would have appreciated that too, just as I would appreciate anyone who's coming before us to have come in a more timely fashion. All right, then the question is, I'm going to, same kind of thinking as the mayor, in that what I hear you saying is that if one of your neighbors wants to have 100, was it 100 yards? 100 feet. You really wouldn't like yards. 100 feet of defensible space, and they come to you, then what you want is that neighbor to do the work and or pay for the work. Is that it?
Yeah, so just like they're doing around the other house, if some of that 100 feet or more, if the fire jurisdiction determines that that's required, extends onto open space lands, we have an easy-to-use permit system that would allow them to come onto the property and as part of their clearance around their house to perform that work. And I think it's vitally important and something that we would not stand in the way of doing.
And so your agency would not be open to talking with or negotiating with that neighbor as to who does the work. You just want them to do the work and to incur the cost.
It depends on the circumstance. We, of course, will talk to all our neighbors about the circumstances. Sometimes these turn into regional projects where we're doing much more clearance than that to create a regional fuel break. So we have and welcome discussions with all our neighbors, but the state law requirement is that the homeowner is responsible for that clearance, and we make that allowance to ensure that you can have the appropriate clearance around your home.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Malone.
Thank you.
Mr. Stump?
When we first started, again, Rob Stump, when we first started talking about the 100-foot defensible space across property lines, I really wanted to honk down on this, and honk down on it meant other counties basically make it very clear, no gray area at all, that it is the adjacent property owner's responsibility to pay for proper clearance. Part of that also goes just with permitting of properties, right? If my house was permitted and is in the right location by the local jurisdiction, and so is the next door neighbor, blah, 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 and we have a property line, basically my home is in an approved location even though I may only have 30 feet to the property line. So I really thought that what was put in this ordinance was good. It's more of a, make sure, first of all, work with your neighbors. Work with your neighbors to try and come to a solution. Not go to them immediately and say, you need to pay for this for me. I guess I can be somewhat sympathetic with the open district, Mid-Peninsula Open District, but they need to be good neighbors as well. And I don't know that this is really going to overly impact them because I've not seen anybody come in with a big stick and beat people over enforcement at this point in time. At some point, enforcement has to come, but I don't know of anybody in this area that's been cited for defensible space violation. So it's a matter of let's all work together to get this done. And I think Mid-Peninsula needs to realize, I don't know that this is really going to change their neighbors' perspective on things. They think they now have the ability to just go and demand that they pay for this to be done. Again, I would remind you, most people in this area have the money to do this if they really are concerned about it. It's not a matter of money. It's about neighbors working with neighbors. And I hope that Mid-Peninsula District can also just be a good neighbor. Land stewardship and wildfire protection is important for everybody to practice, and I don't think that anybody should be exempted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stump. Any questions? Nope. Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to talk about these ordinances we're considering this evening? Okay, seeing no one, I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing. Look to the council for any remaining questions they may have, discussion or motion. Ms. Spector.
Thank you. Question of staff. Probably, well, I won't assume who it's going to be. What is staff's input to the request being made by Mid-Penn?
Thank you, Council Member. Given that we've been working over the past year to continue to strengthen our town's resiliency, and given the due diligence I did looking at the language our peers used, the fact that, in Placer County, they've been doing this since 2007, so they seem to have programs in place with language very similar to ours that are working. Staff would recommend that we, if council is so inclined, that you still move forward with these ordinances tonight. And I think like any ordinance, we can spend the next year watching how it evolves. And if we start to see that what we thought was only going to be something used in rare instances starts to be more prevalent, and if we start to see that the monetary aspect is starting to get a little more confusing, we can reevaluate and come back to council with additional recommendations on language. I think similar to, something like the fence ordinance, where sometimes neighbors agree that one person will pay 100% of it and the other person won't, or they agree they'll pay 50 and 50. The main point of this whole ordinance is recognizing that fire doesn't recognize boundaries and putting the town in a position, based on state law and state law that's currently in existence, that we do have the ability to pretty much demand neighbors in extreme circumstances where a fire official says this creates an imminent danger, that they come to a resolution for the safety of the entire town.
Other questions? Discussion or a motion? Ms. Spector?
Thank you. Having considered everything from the public and from staff, I'm going to go ahead and move that we adopt the ordinances amending Chapter 9, Fire Prevention and Protection, 11, Garbage, Refuse, and Weeds, and 29, Tree Protection of the Town Code.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and second that. I'm supporting it because I think Mid-Peninsula's Open Space District, although I appreciate everything you do, and we are very fortunate to have the land that you are taking care of for us, it is one of the most at-risk, vulnerable pieces of land in the Bay Area, or multiple pieces of land. So I think it's important that you work together with everyone, private owners, government owners, and everyone else to make sure that we're as safe as possible. So I will be seconding and supporting the motion. Other comments or questions, or I'm going to call the vote. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, as I said, we are changing the order of 8 and 9. So we are now going to consider item 9, which is a series of amendments to Chapter 9 of the zoning regulations of the town of Los Gatos, essentially to make permanent pilot programs and pilot ordinances that are sunsetting now. Who will be making the report? Mr. Mullen?
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening. The Town Council has an adopted strategic priority to promote community vitality and encourage land use streamlining efforts. The Council adopted 5 streamlining resolutions in support of this strategic priority, which were set to expire in December of 2019. On October 1st, the Council voted to memorialize the streamlining efforts and adopted a resolution on November 5th extending the temporary streamlining efforts until such time that the Town Code could be amended. On January 8th, the Planning Commission considered the amendments and forwarded a recommendation of approval to the Council with one revision clarifying that the definition of group classes does not include schools. Before you tonight is consideration of the Town Code amendments related to allowing new formula retail businesses in the downtown C2 zone without approval of a CUP, allowing the DRC to approve certain CUP modifications for existing restaurants in the downtown C2 zone and to approve CUPs for new restaurants townwide, approving minor exterior modifications to commercial buildings at the building permit level, and allowing the DRC to approve CUPs for new group classes in the downtown C2 zone. A thorough discussion of each topic is included with your staff report. In conclusion, staff recommends approval of the proposed amendments by taking the actions outlined on pages 4 and 5 of your staff report. Monica Wren, the town's economic vitality manager who ushered the temporary streamlining efforts through the process, is here tonight and is available to answer any questions. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. Are there questions? Okay, I don't have any cards on this item. Now I do. All I have to do is give you the death stare there. And Ms. Spector, you have a question.
I do have a question of staff, because this came up at the Planning Commission also. Are we being asked to consider all of these issues in one motion? I can see that you have an answer over there.
No, it would probably be best to handle them as each separate one, because that way, in case there's not unanimous approval, you'll be able to register if there's some that you do want to support and others you don't.
All right, and I'm assuming, but I will ask, that the different issues begin on page 2 of 5 and then go through the subsequent page?
That's correct. The different issues are summaries provided on pages 2 through 5 of the staff report.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, now I have cards. Christy Maupin.
Hi, thank you for giving me the time to speak. My name is Christy Maupin. I am a resident in the town of Los Gatos. I am also part of the management team over at Loma Brewing Company. I just came tonight to speak in favor of the proposed changes. We would like to be able to see formula retailers come down and use this space without use of a CUP. We would like to see space available for a new restaurant, and that application modifications can be made and reviewed at the development review level rather than going all the way to council. Exterior modifications, we'd like to see that done as part of the building permit process rather than, it's a pretty lengthy process at the moment, and that group classes be allowed without a CUP. With the way the process works now, I feel like it's very prohibitive of like a small business or somebody that doesn't have a huge budget. To go all the way up to council for a CUP, I mean, that's thousands and thousands of dollars. To pay the rent for 6 months on a property while you're waiting for that CUP. So I feel like streamlining the process would just make it easier for businesses to come to Los Gatos and do business down here. I was able to go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting today. Monica Wren was kind enough to come down and speak with us. Based on part of the conversation, I was like, well, if we get this passed tonight and for some reason something comes up, I'm like, is it easier to try to, like, I know we did like an 18-month pilot program, which I think has worked out really well. But if for some reason we make this permanent and we want to make changes or we want to modify and do a longer pilot program, which is more cost-effective to the taxpayer, to the town. So just based on the conversation we had, it sounds like approving the process this evening, and that if sometime in the future, the community, business owners, or somebody, you see a ton of retail coming in and you're like, wait, it's all, commercial. It's a lot more easier to come back to town council and to have like a hold put on it rather to send it back and put different language on it now. That would be another, 6-month process to come back. I just want to say, I know in the last 18 months, we did have a couple of formula retail locations come down. I can tell you everybody's excited to hear about Sephora. And I know that's going to draw people from, Saratoga, Campbell. I mean, the closest Sephora is actually in Oak Ridge Mall. So we're going to be pulling from, around the community. And they're going to stop. They're going to have dinner. They're going to have lunch. They're going to grab coffee at Los Gatos Roasting Company. They're going to enjoy downtown. And I think it's just going to be great for the community to, drawing people in from outside. Thank you.
I do have a question.
You have a question, Mr. Rennie?
Thank you. Just a clarification, you kind of went through the list and you said group classes with no CUP. The way it's written is a CUP is required for the downtown district, but for a staff review only, doesn't have to go to planning commission or council, which simplifies the process, but it still requires a CUP. No CUP outside the downtown, but the way you stated it was no CUP.
Sure, no, excuse me for
You're okay with
misspeaking.
what's here, or do you want no CUP for group classes?
No, I agree with what's written and been sent to council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sue Farwell?
Good evening, Sue Farwell. I want to wholeheartedly ask you to endorse the 5 streamlined processes for downtown. I think the staff's done a great job. I think our planning commission made the right decisions and forwarded this to you. I remember sitting 2 years ago up in the library with, I think many of you were there, and you invited members of the town, tenants, landlords, real estate agents, and everyone told you that it is so difficult to open a business in Los Gatos. And I think you guys heard those comments, and I commend you for making this pilot program, and now ask you to make this a permanent program. The sky hasn't fallen. You know, everyone's afraid of formula retail. We've got a couple new formula retails coming in. I guarantee you there's going to be a couple more formula retails going out. What we're seeing from the decisions that you made as a council with this streamlined process is a really new, exciting, vibrant downtown. We've got a couple new restaurants coming in. We've got new retail coming in. I think Sephora is going to be great. I think Athleta is good. They're not overpowering the town. They're not taking away the mom and pop. We still have the mom and pop. And trust me, opening a business in this town isn't easy. The landlords don't make a random decision and say, oh, we're going to take anyone we're going to get. If we have multiple spaces, landlords are looking at the best fit with the best mix with their existing tenant base, much like you know, Federal Realty does with Westfield Mall. The landlords are making the right decisions. Tenants, it's not easy to open here. The cost of permitting, the building delays, it's not an easy process. And so streamlining this is critical to the vitality and the continued success of downtown Los Gatos. So I wholeheartedly ask you to endorse this, make it permanent. I think you guys have done a great job so far, and let's keep moving forward. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Farwell? Mr. Rennie.
I'm going to go back to the group classes. Is that an important part of our economic vitality for the downtown, is to have group classes or control group classes?
Group classes, you meaning like Soul Cycle and again, it's like formula retail. I don't think that it's. I think group classes are good for the downtown. I don't think that there's going to be 10 stores coming in and saying, I want to do a group class. It doesn't work that way. So I think the group classes should be in there.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Sayak.
So Ms. Farwell, since the changes that we've piloted, are you aware of any independent retailers that have now been able to explore a new shop because it's, in theory, cheaper and easier? Or have the retailers that have come to you been primarily formula retail?
Well, in our buildings, we've actually had one that has been able to expand their restaurant. They've had a very successful restaurant, the Lexington House, and under this new streamlined process, they were able to expand into an adjacent space without the cost of going through the planning commission, the town council. They still have to go through building. They still have to meet all the permitting codes. But yes, it was a great opportunity for the Lexington House. I know that we have a couple new restaurants that are taking advantage of it, like Mike Williams, and I don't know of any independent retailer, because independent retailers, they don't have to go through the permitting process that used to be there for the CUP of Planning Commission, Town Council. If it's just a straight retail, it's straight up. You can open your doors.
Okay, so do you know of any? It seems like a lot of those in the audience know, what's percolating. Do you know of any mom and pop stores that are planning to open or thinking of opening, given the streamlining that we've piloted? What we're hearing is that it's easier for formula retail, and so I'd like to hear from someone that says it's...
Okay, so let's take Mike Williams at the Le Boulanger
Well, I guess
space.
let me clarify,
Okay.
non-restaurant.
Okay, but non-restaurant retail didn't need to go through the permitting process of the Planning Commission and the Town Council, correct?
True.
Okay.
But I'm just curious if just the, just the
I haven't
feeling
heard any pushback. I haven't heard anyone say, oh, now we can't get a retail space because it's all restaurants. I've not heard that. I don't believe that's the case. There's still some vacancies out there. So I don't believe that is the case. I haven't experienced it. I know a couple of the other gentlemen here are going to speak. You can ask them that same question, but I have not experienced this big pushback that, oh, we can no longer get a rental space in Los Gatos because it's all formula retail.
Okay, that answers my question.
Okay, sorry, I misunderstood what you're getting
Okay, I want to ask the question backwards.
Okay.
Do you know of any mom and pops that have been forced out as a result of the pilot
I do not.
programs? Thank you.
And I actually truly believe that the mom and pops are going to be more successful. The more people we have downtown, the better off we are. It's just people that will come down, they'll stay, they'll go, wow, I didn't know that store existed. I didn't know that mom and pop was there. And they're going to stop in and shop. So I believe it is critical and vital, and I think it helps everybody out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Randy Chen.
Hello, Randy Chen, Chamber of Commerce. As you know, or I thought Catherine would go first, but Catherine will tell you that we support these amendments. However, as you already know, the biggest concern tonight is about the formula retail portion of the amendment. The fact is that in the last 18 months, when we've opened the floodgates, so to speak, we've not been inundated with applications for formula retail spaces. We had a great meeting with Monica this morning with about 15 downtown businesses, and we sort of went through the process and how this all happens. And after much discussion, we realized that in regard to the formula retail section of the resolution, the process is easier to approve tonight and then amend if necessitated down the line. If this section is not approved tonight, we will have taken a huge step backwards and erased all the progress we've made in the last 18 months. Property managers, landlords, and real estate agents have begun to realize that Los Gatos is open for business. If we do not approve this section, we jeopardize that momentum. The fact that we actually have a net zero sum of formula retail stores, between some coming and some going, over the last 18 months shows that we're not being overrun by formula businesses. If we see that that is becoming the case in the future, you can put a moratorium or change the code to have some limitations. And as Arn just explained on the fire ordinance, we can keep an eye on it and adjust as needed. And it was explained to us today at our meeting that it's easier and quicker to approve the resolution tonight and then amend it, rather than drop it, lose the momentum, and get the ball rolling again, because it takes at least 6 months to get it to go through staff, your schedule, and all that. And not to mention, then we will just stop some of the progress that we've made in returning Los Gatos to vitality. So,
Ms. Sayak?
Ms. Chen, so the meeting that has been mentioned today, was it a board meeting where the board took an official action to either support or oppose, or?
No.
Okay.
Monica came to our office to explain what you guys were doing.
Okay.
What you guys were looking at tonight.
And so it was an explanation, and so what I'm hearing is there was consensus among those that were in attendance.
Mostly. I mean, you obviously have already gotten letters from people who don't want more formula retail, but I think Monica clarified that we could approve it, and if we were, all of a sudden, you got 100 applications for formula retail stores, I mean, obviously that's unrealistic because we don't have that many spaces, but that then we could, you've put moratoriums on hair salons and whatnot before, and that we could sort of go down that path.
Mr. Rennie?
You brought up a question. You said we've gotten letters from people that don't want more formula. I haven't seen any of those letters.
You haven't. I didn't read all the letters, but I know you got letters from our current, some of our current retailers that were concerned about this portion of the.
Okay. I hadn't actually heard that.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Well, that's what they were, that was a concern.
Okay.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Chen.
Oh, wait. Oh, can I? So
Thank you, Ms.
we
Chen.
have had a mom and pop store open. Well, mostly restaurants, but just right, the stationery store.
Careful. Bob Kaya. Apologies.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and esteemed council. As you know, my name is Bob Kaya and I represent McCarthy Ranch. And as you also probably know, we have a very vested interest in Los Gatos from both a personal, business, and property perspective. By way of the Planning Commission, council, and staff's leadership, we have seen noticeable progress toward the revitalization of our downtown area and are here tonight to full-heartedly encourage the council to permanently adopt all the currently temporary resolutions before you this evening. To boot, I'd like to provide 3 specific examples of these resolutions working toward the town's strategic initiative of being open for business. Number 1 was the minor exterior modifications to commercial buildings resolution, which allowed us to renovate our existing Highway 9 properties, and upon completion of construction, we will be able to re-tenant them with first-class tenants who will collectively add to the strong fabric that is our community, as well as provide a warm and welcome entrance to the downtown. This was something that was proving to be economically non-feasible prior to the passage of this temporary resolution. The new restaurant CUPs to be heard at the DRC resolution has directly benefited one of our prospective tenants, someone we're currently in lease negotiations with and is a mom and pop restaurant. They're a first-rate Bay Area local business who's wanted to come to Los Gatos for some time. They have a location in Campbell, but have been very gun-shy due to what they perceived as overly restrictive regulation. Based on this and other resolutions, we were able to convince them that Los Gatos is heading in a positive policy direction and they should make the move. They obliged and, pending all necessary approvals, will be calling Los Gatos home. The restaurant CUP modifications at the DRC resolution allowed Rootstock to modify its existing CUP so we may offer live music twice weekly, which has been widely well received. We would not have been able to do that economically, as it would have otherwise cost us about 15 grand. As we feel these examples show, these resolutions are bringing real results and will continue to encourage positive developments for the betterment of our town, should they be permanently enacted. We appreciate the council's consideration of these items and encourage a resounding yes in favor of their permanency. Thank you for your time.
Questions for Mr. Kale? Ms. Sayak?
So I'll ask the question that I asked of others. Do you know of any non-restaurant independent retailers that are looking to come in, or the mayor's question, that have been forced out? So.
Off the top of my head, I do not know of any direct retailers. We've gotten a tremendous amount of interest from group classes, restaurants, coffee shops, that type of thing, mostly independent. To be honest with you, a lot of the formula retailers are actually still kind of scared. They think that Los Gatos is a very tough place to operate and open up for business, so they seem to have a bad taste. We tend to have better luck convincing people to at least consider it if they're local. But yeah, nothing purely retail. Anything else?
Thank you. Jim Foley?
Honorable Mayor and Town Council, Jim Foley, property and business owner. I submitted a letter, hopefully you got it. It's maybe the 3rd or 4th letter going back over 18 months to 2 years on some of these topics. The topics that are, these five remaining topics for the streamlining have been discussed in I don't know how many different forums, whether it was the North 40 Specific Plan Committee or Planning Commission or ad hoc committee meetings or town council meetings. I think these are the final steps that need to be taken to kind of see through a vision that started a long time ago to revitalize the downtown. So don't stop now is kind of, I think we're right at the goal line. It's the temporary suspension that allowed these things to occur in the last 18 months has been working, like others have said. So I think making them permanent is the next step, and I encourage you to do it. It's been a very measured and thoughtful approach that a lot of people have been looking at. So I wouldn't be too concerned that this final step to kind of get it over the goal line, in my mind, is something that's going to unwind everything or cause, you know, all kinds of formula retailers to show up and put mom and pops out of business or restaurants to flood through the town. There's still so many things that's so difficult to get businesses open or get properties leased. That kind of, I think we've vetted through that there's no doomsday scenario that's going to occur from the policy changes. So I encourage you to vote in favor of the staff recommendations tonight and make everything permanent going forward.
Questions for Mr. Foley? Thank you very much. Catherine Summers?
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. Catherine Summers with the Chamber of Commerce. So I applaud your efforts and your courage in getting this far with the streamlining of the ordinances and town codes and to make it easier to do business in Los Gatos. Thanks to the council and to Monica for taking on these risks. 13 ordinances, I think it was, 4 or 5 years in the making, and the results are finally coming into view. The word is getting out that Los Gatos is open for business. Tonight, you are looking at and considering the last of these 4 amendments and voting on whether or not to make them permanent. On 1, 2, and 3, the group classes, the fixing up of buildings, the retail to restaurant, I think those are pretty easy. Slam dunk. I think almost everybody that I've talked to agrees with all of those. We've talked with a lot of members in the community, the staff, leaders, and all agree. So let's continue to make doing business a little easier. On number 4, the formula retail, unlimited, anywhere, anyhow, it could seem a little careless, a little cavalier. And what would I look like if I supported it? Because am I going against my some of my smaller mom and pop shops and some of my members that I care a lot about? But as I looked at it, and I spent the whole weekend kind of in a conundrum and talked to a lot of them and had this meeting today, which was very constructive. And one person actually said, and this I think changed my view of the whole day and my whole thought on it, it was, if we could only be so lucky to have that problem. We don't have that problem. So why are we creating the problem that we don't even have? And so that was the facts. And when we started we floated this idea around for the last 18 months, and now, we put the cap on 5 new ones, but really, at the end of the day, as you've heard from a few different people, we're actually at a net loss. There's not like there's a whole bunch coming in. That said, there's not a whole lot of independent retailers coming in either. There's not just a whole lot of people that want to come do business in Los Gatos or anywhere, for that matter. So really, are we shooting ourselves in the foot if we just close the gates before they've really even opened? So again, I ask, if we could only be so lucky to have that as a problem. And if we have that as a problem, we can stop it so quickly. So I think it's worth it to take the risk and to keep us open for business. We have so much momentum. We've got a lot of people coming. We have all of a sudden the commercial real estate brokers are starting to look at Los Gatos and giving it a second look. And I don't think we can stop now.
Ms. Spector.
Thank you. When you say it's a problem when you're talking to your constituents and you say it's a problem we don't have, what's the problem we don't have? I want to make sure that I understand what you're saying.
So when I say if we were only so lucky, and the problem is that we'd have so many formula companies waiting at the, lining up on North Santa Cruz saying, I want that spot, I want this spot. We don't have that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Summers. I have no other cards. Does anybody else want to talk to us about this? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing, look to this council for any questions they may have of staff before we get into our discussion or motion. Ms. Sayoc?
If I may, just real quickly, Mayor, because
Yes.
I want to correct myself earlier, although you should go down the list on the staff report 2 and 3. At the end of the day, we will need just one motion for a first introduction of the draft ordinance, since all of those sections are together in one ordinance.
Thank you. So
Okay,
my
Ms.
question to Mr. Mullen, so what we're hearing, at least what I'm hearing, is an opportunity to revisit this, to see if it's causing a floodgate of unintended consequences. So my question to you is, what would you and others think is a good amount of time to look at this? A year, 18 months, 2 years? Like, what would be enough so that it's actually meaningful to actually look back and see whether or not it's causing unintended consequences?
Thank you. I think looking at the benchmark of that the temporary resolutions used mostly between 9 and 18 months, but I'd also like to defer to Monica Wren to get her input.
I think it would really be whatever the council's comfortable with. It could be a time frame, or it could be a number of formula retailers or a number of businesses. I think as we look at all of these things this evening, if you would just like the staff to come forward with a report, even in a memo form or at a council meeting, we'd be happy to do that at any benchmark time that feels most comfortable for you.
Ms. Spector?
Thank you. For Mr. Schultz, process question. Let's say the council, the first one here, the council approves formula retail businesses in the downtown, and then too many come forward or something to that effect. How could we stop it, as Ms. Sayoc was referencing, in 12 months, 24 months? How can you do that when you have an ordinance and you have entities applying?
So we certainly could adopt a moratorium by 4/5 vote and then move forward with an ordinance amendment very quickly, is the way we would process that. So you'd have to do an ordinance amendment, but we would certainly process that as quickly as possible. The maximum time, we could probably do that within the 60-day period, but you could immediately do a moratorium on certain businesses and put them on hold until you reestablish the process. There wouldn't be any vested interest in a CUP. It's not, unless you went and changed it completely, then you might have some vested interest, but for the most part, you would not have that on any of the businesses that I can think that would come in. If you change the zoning not to allow it at all, as opposed to the process it had to go through, that's not going to be a vested right. But for example, if you someone had applied for a formula retail and you turned around and said there will be no more allowed whatsoever, as opposed to saying we're going to go back to a CUP process that goes through council, one would not be a violation of vested right and the other one might be.
So if you have a formula retail that has applied, and then the sense of the community and or the council is that we have too many, we don't process that application?
Right. The moratorium would put it on hold, and then you would adopt an ordinance with whatever that new process is for them to get approval. And like I said, I don't think you'd be able to say there would be none, but you'd at least have to have, because you still have that discretion. There's still CUP process that's going to be required. It's just, it would go back to the process of having to be vetted at both the Planning Commission and Council, and ultimately approved or not approved.
Thank you.
Okay, I have some questions. This is probably for Mr. Mullen and or Ms. Wren. Ms. Summers said we were at a net loss since and I'm assuming she's talking about the beginning of the pilot program period for formula retail. And whoever can answer that, will you confirm and tell me where the net loss is?
I can't confirm that there's a net loss, but what I can confirm is that we have 3 new formula retailers that replaced businesses that were not formula before. And then I think if we look at the net loss, we have lost 1 in Old Town and then most recently Williams-Sonoma. So we could be +1 at this point, or there could be another formula that I'm missing. But I think what the point is that although we have 3 in new locations, we have also seen some leave in other locations.
Then my next question is, several people referred to the cost of the conditional use permit that was necessary prior to the pilot. Can you just give me a ballpark of the time and cost under the old formula retail ordinance?
Sure. So for formula retail, under the current code, the CUP's roughly $8,500, and then a business license of $75 to $975, and typical processing time was 12 to 24 weeks, with the deciding body being the Planning Commission. Under the amended code, the formula retail would be a use and occupancy certificate, which is an over-the-counter permit typically, which is $262. Business license of $75 to $975, so there's no change there. And then average processing time is typically over-the-counter, and the community development director would be the approving body.
Okay, and so my final question. There are several formula retail outlets that are already in town that got approved through the prior process before we did the pilot. So I think Williams-Sonoma was one of those, Apple was one of those. I'm just trying to figure out, of the formula retail that we have in town, those, or are replacing, things that were formula retail, how many were actually approved under the prior process, if you have any ballpark on that?
So there's actually kind of two stages there. Things like Williams-Sonoma preceded the original formula retail, so that space is what's known as legal non-conforming at this point, because a CUP does not exist. So if this ordinance was not adopted tonight, it would be a 6-month window to fill that space. I would say Lululemon was the last CUP that we approved for a formula retail. Anything that's open after that either replaced an existing formula retail or took advantage of the temporary resolution. And again, it was 3 stores that actually tallied under the temporary resolution, and all the others, such as Athleta, replaced J. Crew, the Walking Company replaced Jamboree. So there's kind of 3 levels, but Lululemon was the last one approved with a CUP.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, discussion and or motion. Mr. Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. So my thoughts on the matter, we'll start with the formula retail. So I think we made the original formula retail ordinance in a much different world. There was a time when formula retail were expanding all over the place. Brick and mortar was the place to be in retail, and the world has changed a lot since then. There's a lot more sales going on online. The formula retail companies now are, in a lot of cases, they're pulling back, they're retracting. It's not the same kind of world. They're trying to figure out, how do I sell more online? How do I have less stores? It's just not the same world when we first passed this ordinance, and this trial period has kind of shown us that. We had some formula retail come in, and that was good, but we also lost at least 3 formula retail at the same time. So it's not everybody's clamoring to come in like it might have been when we made this ordinance. So the formula retail doesn't bother me at all to make the exception or remove the CUP permanent. To remove the CUP permanently doesn't bother me. I have stated before, I have a little hesitance on the 2021 ordinance with the restaurants. I think Los Gatos would lose some character if a lot of formula restaurants came in, but when I look at what does come into Los Gatos, it's really mom and pop restaurants. So what we're getting is good. It doesn't look like formula restaurants want to overwhelm Los Gatos, and maybe the size spaces may not allow that to occur. So I'm willing to go ahead and keep our, make permanent our exceptions also there, our removal of 2021. I had looked at I asked a couple questions about the group classes because I was wondering if we got it backwards. A lot of times the issue with group classes is the amount of the parking issues. And the thing is, the downtown district is where there is a lot of parking, and if people come in for group classes, they have a lot more chance that if those group classes are in the downtown, they're going to do something else, maybe buy something, go for coffee, maybe have something to eat, meet with some of their friends after the class. It's typically when we put group classes more in the neighborhoods that we get a lot more complaints. Orange Theory gets complaints from people in the street behind. We get complaints from Newell all the time for the Bay Club. So I looked at it and I thought, what we have in here is a DRC CUP approval in the downtown district, but by right everywhere else. And I almost thought, well, don't we really have that backwards? But I'm willing to not change it. So I would go ahead and make a motion then to approve staff's recommendation of this draft ordinance that will introduce this draft ordinance by title only to amend Chapter 29 of the Town Code regarding land use and economic vitality streamlining related to formula retail in the downtown C2 zone, restaurants, minor exterior modifications to commercial buildings, and group classes.
Thank you. Is there a second? Councilwoman Sayak.
I'll second, and I'll make just a general comment. Couple things. When we started studying these subjects about 5 years ago, I think one of the takeaways that was very large on my mind weren't necessarily the specifics of what we're about to discuss or what we have been discussing, but just this ability to be very nimble, because although we can guess and we can predict, one thing that Monica Wren constantly reminds us is it changes constantly. And so to be able to have less regulation and just active conversations with the chamber and an active staff that's monitoring what's happening in our town is much more important, so that we could act if it looks like there's unintended consequences, but be very nimble to accommodate what the market is moving towards. So I'm very comfortable with that approach, which is why I'll support this. And what I would ask staff to do, if I could amend the motion, is just a staff report from staff next year of just how it's going, and to continue the conversations. I appreciate, Ms. Wren, that you spent some time with the chamber today. I think those conversations are much more important for us to understand the retail versus restaurant versus formula conversations that are happening next year and the year after. And with that, I feel comfortable supporting this.
And I'm happy to accept the amendment.
Okay. Other comments? Ms. Spector?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We council received letters from Ginger Rowe and Susan Testa of Time Out and Romantiques, and I agree with them. The formula retail CUPs the ordinances have been in existence for some time from prior councils, planning commissions, council members, planning commissioners, who recognized that over time, a formula store has greater resources, has access to greater resources, and that it will or could drive out local businesses. And so Los Gatos, Burlingame, all these towns, you begin where you can, no matter where you go, the town, the city, the mall, wherever you are, all look the same because you know exactly where they are. You'll know exactly what stores are going to be there. And if I heard the testimony correctly, we have, I think what was said, lost 3 local businesses, but we haven't gained local businesses, and that was exclusive of restaurants. And so because in the past, I have not wanted Los Gatos to look like and be like every other mall and city in the United States. I still don't, and I will not be supporting the motion because of the formula retail component.
Thank you. I will be supporting the motion. As Councilwoman Sayak said, we started this effort 5 years ago. We broke it into small pieces to try to get some progress made. These are the examples of the small pieces. And we actually debated how long to continue the pilot. How long did it take to rent a property? How long did it take to put a tenant into place? How long did it take to have a lease actually show whether anything was happening, so that we could determine, is there a dramatic change based upon that? And we chose the 18-month period in order to study that. And we've done the 18-month period, and we don't have 800 formula retail. We have 3, and some are replacing other formula retail, some aren't. Businesses change. In this retail environment, it's a miracle that a formula retail or any retail can actually begin a business. And I specifically asked, have we forced out any mom and pop? The answer was no. And if we impose a formula retail condition and that expense and that time, it's no guarantee that a mom and pop will suddenly decide to rent a space. We have to recognize that the formula retail, I think Ms. Rowe and Ms. Testa were objecting to recent ones because they were just businesses that they didn't particularly care for. And that happens. We don't choose the businesses. And so Apple came in that I think people like and the town likes under the form of retail. Other businesses came in under the formula retail. But if we want to be, as Councilwoman Sayak says, nimble, then I think we need to have these streamlining efforts in place. And if there is a monitoring effort later, a year later, we can see, oh, we were wrong, great. Or we were right, great. And then we can get the reaction from the community and the business people and see what happens. But as Mr. Foley said, I think this is the time for us to actually firm up the decisions and the progress that we've made. So I will be supporting the motion. So with that, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Passes 3-1. Vice Mayor Spector opposed. And we need to read it.
An ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 zoning regulations of the Town Code regarding land use and economic vitality streamlining related to formula retail businesses in the downtown C2 zone, restaurants, minor exterior modifications to commercial buildings, and group classes.
Thank you very much. Thanks to those who came and spoke. Ms. Sayak.
Mayor and Council, I am recusing myself on item number 8. I am employed by a nonprofit that does receive community grants.
Thank you and have a good evening. So as soon as Ms. Sayak is out of the building, as it were, we will hear item number 8, which is a proposed update to our grant program. Mr. Baker.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight I'm presenting proposed updates to the town's community grant program based on input from commissions, this council at previous meetings, staff analysis, and communication with our partners. We hope that the proposed changes will make the process more fair and equitable with guidelines and goals for the program that are more clearly defined. And we'll skip the background there if you've got it in the report, and I'll go straight to the highlights of the proposed changes. What we have for the proposed changes are to move the timeline for the grant application cycle to begin after approval of the town's annual budget and to approve the total amount to be distributed for community grants as part of the annual budget process. At the last council meeting where this was discussed, there was general consensus that the total amount for grants should be considered as part of the budget. After much thought, staff believes that the most efficient way to run this program going forward is to align it with our own budget year. Currently, we take applications in the spring. We make the recommendations for the award amounts before the budget through our commissions, and then we seek council approval to have those suggested funds be added to the budget after the fact. We propose that council approve the total for grant awards for the fiscal year first as part of the normal budget process. So, for example, you would say we put aside $150,000 or $120,000 for grants for this year in this budget. We would then open the applications in July after the total amounts had already been budgeted. This streamlines the work for the staff, allows us to communicate with applicants and commissioners more clearly in terms of the finite funds that we have to work with. And under this model, since the budget would already be approved, the individual grants would not need to come back to the council for final approval unless council desired us to do that, meaning that after those applications came in, we could handle it administratively from that point because you've already approved the total budget amount. With that total budget amount, commissions and staff would divide that total amount into smaller award buckets or smaller award amounts that we could advertise as part of the grant process, or as part of the grant process, if council wanted to step in during the and have more say in terms of how those funds are divided out, they could do so as part of the grant process, but it would not be necessary. Whoops. Pardon me. In putting this together, there's also strong feeling expressed for benefiting the community by prioritizing one-time funding to launch new services, new programs, new events, and new initiatives for which future sustainability would not necessitate ongoing town funding, while at the same time recognizing that we have human services organizations that have been longtime partners for which our ongoing grant funding has become important in their yearly operations. With this in mind, the proposal here would have 3 types of grants. The first would be one-time grants to nonprofit organizations to promote the creation of a new project, a new service, event, or initiative for the benefit of the community. And looking at this one of the things that we would judge would be future sustainability of that particular project without reapplying for grants or the need for other grants. It's really to kind of kickstart new ideas for the community or for fund areas that we'd not funded in the past. An area that we borrowed from Palo Alto, some of our neighboring jurisdictions, is the idea that we have community members that have some great ideas. They're looking for funding to start initiatives or projects in our community, but because they're not nonprofits and they're not affiliated with a nonprofit, they would be excluded under normal circumstances. So an idea that we borrowed from Palo Alto was small one-time grants, what we call innovation grants, in amounts that would probably be $1,500, $2,000 to individuals in the community who to bring forward a particular idea or project that would be for the benefit of the community. For Palo Alto, this is had a lot of student groups that came forward with all kinds of things regarding sustainability of the environment and all types of wonderful projects that were good benefits. And then the third type of grant would be sustainability grants for human services organizations. And these would be separate. These are not one-time grants for new things, but rather are human services groups for which we have continuously given support for 5 years or more. We would just promise them a 2-year funding commitment rather than having them apply every single year. When we had originally suggested a different way to look at sustainability grants for some of these human services organizations, we had suggested possibly pulling them out of the grant process completely and moving them to a different line item in the budget. After more analysis and thinking of that, we believe now that we're going to have greater accountability if we do keep them within the grant process. We have the commissions will have some more oversight over what they're doing and the projects that they have going on. And it also allows us to adapt more to budgetary changes that we might have. 2 years we thought was a good amount. They could reapply for another 2 years after that time period was up. However, if during those couple of years we have some economic downturns and we need to really pull back, we're really pulling back from the full grant process in general, as opposed to having particular line items in the budget for these specific groups. With that, there was only 5 groups that would qualify for this particular category, and those are listed in your report. We'd like to, where possible, align grant categories with council priorities. So when you're having your priority setting meeting, if there's a particular priorities that step out, we would incorporate those into the rubric for judging or ranking the grants that would come in. So for example, if you had environment or safety as being top priorities, then within our ranking rubric for the one-time grants, we would have grants that would coincide with those particular priorities would receive extra points. And we'd like to incorporate community vitality and events as eligible categories for grants. These have not been grant categories previously. Community vitality would be broadly defined so that really a nonprofit could come forward or an individual could come forward with anything that could really benefit the community and apply for the grants. Whereas before we just had the arts, education, and human services, we now have a wider range that people could seek funding in order to benefit the community. We'd like to default to a single fair competitive process that we can direct all of our nonprofits and public and community groups towards when funds are requested. So just one process that everybody can go through. and improve the communication to the public regarding the applications and the award process. Under that, some of the little subpoints of that would be that it would be a single opportunity per year to apply for funding, and it's a finite process. We do it once a year, you get one shot, and you can apply again next year if it doesn't work out, or you can apply for a different grant the next year. We would move towards funding the full amount requested up to the limit that we had advertised. So with the amount that you would put forward in your budget, we'd break that down into smaller amounts. We would say there's, for example, 7 grants of $10,000 each, which you could apply for. If an organization applied for that full $10,000, then we would award that, rather than in the past where we had broken that down and given less. We would like to move to a ranking and recommendation based on the written applications only. It was a little bit problematic, and there was some mixed consensus regarding having presentations. We think there is a strength actually in presentations coming at the end of a grant cycle and reporting out in terms of what kinds of things have actually transpired rather than at the beginning of the grant cycle. So we would ask that a presentation come at the very end of the grant cycle, highlighting the different things that have come out of the program, some of the wonderful things that have been accomplished, and that could be done at a council meeting or, as I suggested in the report, just a short 2-3 minute video, which we could add to the website, town's website, so that it could be made available for anybody to watch at any time. 1 application per organization per grant cycle. A standard scoring rubric to rank those grant applications that would be used by both the Community Service Commission and the Arts Commission, and really push our outreach and marketing of the community grants in order to get more word out about those opportunities and hopefully get more organizations and individuals involved. With that, I have just kind of a hypothetical example of what this might look like. Budget year would be coming up. You'd be getting your budget documents. In your budget document, staff would say, we would recommend $150,000 for grant expenditures for the fiscal year. This number was chosen based on the expenditure from last year, which was about $123,000 in grants that was recommended. Council approved additional funding for grants, and then there was an extra $10,000 for community event grants, and so it came out fairly close to this amount. So I just threw this in as a placeholder amount. The budget would be approved in this example, and at that point, it really moves out of the council's hands, unless council would like to have more input in that, and becomes more administrative and on the commissioner's hands. And staff and the commissions would look at that 150,000 and they would say, okay, we're going to divide it in terms of 750,000 for human services grants, 4,500 for these small little innovative grants, and 70,000 as one-time grants for nonprofits, which would divide up as 10 grants at 7,000 each. Staff and commissions would look at the total amount and make some decisions based on the priorities that you had set. Or during the budget process, if council wanted to have more of a hand in it and wanted to divide these buckets ahead of time, that would be absolutely fine too. And this, the budget would be passed. All that money would already be in the budget and accounted for. And so then we would then open the application process, which would be mid-July, as opposed to March, April, when we would have done it in the past. Those applications would close in August. The commissions would rank those one-time grants and community innovation grants on the standard scoring rubric, and then those award recommendations would come out in September. Because it would be administrative at this point, because the budget has already been approved by council, it would not need to come back to council to be seen again, unless you desired it to. We could administratively just stamp and say that that budget's been approved, and we could go ahead and issue out those grant checks to those organizations. And that, with that, I just wanted to mention that I did contact all of our grant recipients for this past year, as well as applicants and recipients for this past year, as well as the previous year, just to kind of let them know. They were all sent a copy of the staff report. I made phone calls to as many as I could and talked to many of them in person, just to give them a heads up so that they had an idea of the possible changes that were being proposed. And with that, I conclude my report. If you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Are there any questions? Okay, I don't have any cards for public comment, so if you want to wait till after public comment, it could be really short. Does anyone want to talk? Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public portion of the hearing. Mr. Rennie?
So I want to explore two areas. The presentation part, I've always liked the presentations. When I think when I first read it, I thought you were sort of eliminating presentations to the council, but you're actually talking about eliminating presentations to the commissions also.
That is correct. So the application would be based solely on the strength of the written application, and that's really to keep it fair. We've had numerous occasions where not everybody's represented and able to show up for those presentations. Just trying to keep it all fair. It felt like the best thing to do was just to have it all within the written application as it came in.
And, my concern is, you read the written application. So the ones that we get over and over, it's pretty clear what's going on. I have a little more concern, if maybe that's too strong a word, but for, part of this is we're trying to actually get some new applications for some new things and get some people to try some new things, make it easier for them. It's a lot harder, especially if they're new, they may not write it very well. And it just seems to me that you would want to be able to, if I was making decisions, I might want to be able to ask questions based on maybe, okay, I've never seen this before, and I don't completely understand what it is that they're trying to do.
That could be possible to a certain degree. It wasn't completely the feeling of the entirety of the Arts Commission or the Community Services Commission. And we did have quite a lot of problems. Did feel it was quite a complaint that we had from many of our applicants, just in terms of the way that process worked. I would say as someone who writes grants very often, it's very, very unusual. Usually the strength of the application, as you've written it, should have everything laid out for you. And if you can't figure out what's going on in the written application, it's a strong indication of how things may play out when you actually are given the money. That would be my thought. However, if that's something you wish to change and you would like to have that back in there, that we could make that change.
And I reluctantly maybe moving to allow it, not to have the presentations. I've just, for me, that's how I got to know the organizations better when we had them here. Also on the Hackadack County Board, we get the presentations there too. So you get a much better feel from the organizations when you get the presentations. I've been around 5 years. I know all the organizations, so I don't need them now. But if I was a new council member, the written may not really give me as much of a flavor. My second area, if I could move in, the second area of questions is, so you also talking about removing council from the decision process. Why is that? Does it seem like council doesn't want to see that? Or are you just trying to reduce our workload? You don't think it's really necessary?
Just saying that and by all means, if council would like to be involved in those other parts of the process, that's absolutely fine. Just saying that if we move this application period to after the budget is approved, then it's not necessary as it was before. So what you were doing in the past was really approving the budget that was recommended. It really wasn't approving those individual grants. And so now that the budget amount is put forward, we could administratively do that. If you would love to see those back before council again, we could bring them back before council again, and council could make a final stamp on that. I think one thing that we thought might help with this is that in this process, what we noticed from the past year and the year prior was that when those grants came back before council, and we were looking at it all, that's when we got quite a few members from different community groups coming forward that had not gone through the grant process and were asking for other funds. They're kind of circumventing that process, or they were asking for different amounts to be given if they had received an award or recommended for an award. So this would be this would circumvent some of that. But by all means, if you would like to see these grants come before council again, or if you'd like to have more at hand in them at any point, that's not a problem at all.
And I only hesitate because I know we have adjusted some of the recommendations from the commissions before, and maybe that's not necessarily a good thing, actually. Maybe we should be just leaving it all up to the commissions, but they could do something completely crazy that council wouldn't be happy with, and we wouldn't really ever see it. I see you reminded me that there was kind of a big problem, actually, that you're helping to problem solve by not bringing it to council. So that seems to make sense. In the back of my mind, I thought of another idea. What if we delegated the mayor to sit with the commission and make the decisions and I say the mayor because having been a mayor, and I see the other ones typically have a certain agenda, and I know when I was mayor, the recommendations didn't follow my agenda very well, so I wanted to adjust them. And so the only reason I suggest maybe the mayor wants to also be there is because, you know, we tend to want to support the mayor's agenda, and if the commission is not supporting the mayor's agenda, there might be a reason to be involved. Just throw that idea out.
Any comments? Okay. Mr. Baker, thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. I thought it was really thoughtful and laid out very well. Thank you, and addresses a lot of the issues that we've had going forward. Starting backward with Mr. Rennie's comment, the town of Los Gatos is fortunate that it doesn't have a strong mayor system. It has a council manager system. So the mayor's agenda should be no different than the council's agenda. Just an observation. But as a potential compromise, I just wanted to sort of ask some questions, maybe put Mr. Rennie at ease. If we follow your program, which I actually support, but if there was the concern that Mr. Rennie has, could the council be presented with, for example, the rubric that would be used and the application that would be in the process to look at it and say, fine, number one. Number two, if that happened, then once grants are evaluated under that rubric and that application process and awards were determined at a staff level, could those recommendations without, I mean, you probably can't do this because it's a public hearing, but could those simply be presented to the council to check them off and say, fine? But, so those are my two questions, but with the caveat that I think it is actually unfair when the people come up and ask for something different, an award that's different, and as you said, circumvent the process through that public process. So I'm kind of hesitant to provide that opportunity, but going back to my questions, could those suggested compromises work?
I would say yes on all counts. I think we can absolutely present to you the rubric and the scoring data that we would use going forward, before or during that process, and then there's a way we can list out who those grant recipients would be along with that or after that. And I don't believe it has to be a public hearing. It could just be it could be just something that goes on consent or a memo, as far as I know.
Certain grants do state and federal. I'm not sure if that same applies to local. We'd have to look into it. So I know, the CBDG require public hearings, certain federal grants do. Since it's local funds, I'm just not sure. And if it was necessary, then we'd have to have the public hearing. We can look into that.
I'll look into that further to see if that's the case. It may have been a holdover from the CDGB funds, right?
Okay. Any other questions? Just further discussion or motion?
If I could just add one item in regards to the challenges with having an application process only. Director Baker has spent the last 2 years significantly updating the application process to make it a lot easier for the types of grant requests we get. the old process was really geared towards a federal CDBG type grant process. And so Director Baker has taken the lead on making sure that the application should be readily understandable to anyone who wants to apply.
Okay, thank you for that. Seeing nobody leaping to make a motion, I'll then make a motion that we approve the proposed update of the town's community grant program with the addition that the council see the proposed rubric and scoring system and application prior to implementation. Discussion or a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. And again, Mr. Banker, thank you for all of your work on this. Appreciate it.